In the session, its impact, its characteristic features, and its development. In this session, I'll be taking you to indirect colonial situation or influence of colonialism on Indian India, where nearly 1/3 of Indian geopolitical region were under the administrative control of members and representatives of various political dynasties, Maharajas, princes, their representatives. I am giving you certain classic examples of my own state, princely state of Mysore, also called as princely Mysore. Can you hear me? ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir, we can hear you.
Audible, sir.
Okay, we have to go back to English East India Company. In 1799, after the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, that was 1799. The administration of princely Mysore was taken over by English East India Company. We should not use these words, taken over. Control was took over by English East India Company. I think there is a lot of difference between taking over and taking over the control. Because the government of English East India Company, during its colonial stage, had suppressed, hope you understand the meaning, had suppressed several rights of many princely states. And one among them was the princely state of Mysore. In 1799, when English East India Company, after the defeat of Tipu Sultan and his death, took over the administration of princely state of Mysore, in the month of June 1799, the responsibility of administration of princely Mysore was handed over to the representative of the Wadayar dynasty. That means to say that the credit of creating princely state of Mysore should go to English East India Company. If you have any questions about this, you can ask me at the end of the session. So, English East India Company created princely state of Mysore. It created princely state of Mysore in such a manner that it is surrounded by British and their allies. British and their allies. And second important thing, princely Mysore, when it was created in 1799, for your kind information, it did not have a connection with sea, S-E-A, without any coastal connections. And from 1799 onwards, we are under the impression that English East India Company began to extend its indirect hold. I am trying to impress you by using the word indirect colonial control. So princely Mysore underwent the influence of indirect colonialism. You remember in the first session, I made it a point, direct control, indirect control. So direct colonialism, indirect colonialism. Why English East India Company? It wanted to have under its control, either in a direct or an indirect manner. For that, we have to go back to the history of English East India Company, which began, though the company began in 1600, we have to identify the history of this particular situation right from the time of Warren Hastings. You know, Warren Hastings was the Governor General of English East India Company. It was he who implemented a typical political policy called ring fence. Ring, R-I-N-G, fence, F-E-N-C-E. Hope you know the meaning of the words ring fence. Fence is a compound or a fence where fence is imposed in an indirect manner in the form of a ring surrounding that state. It is called ring fence. That is the idea of the English East India Company to check the growth of princely states, to check their political rights. During the time of Lord Wellesley, who was the Governor General of English East India Company, who is also considered as the real founder of English company's role in India, it was during his time he implemented the policy of subsidiary alliance. See, some of the policies which were introduced by English East India Company, they really came as a threat to the growth of princely states in India. So, Lord Wellesley's subsidiary alliance, where English company, it decided to introduce or bring in under its gamut subsidiary alliance a large number of princely states so that it can make money, extract money, and escape from the responsibility of administering the army. You keep a contingent of the army in a particular state. To maintain that army, you receive money. That is subsidiary state. Subsidy. Nowadays, the meaning of the word subsidy, it has a different meaning. Then it was different. And number three is during the time of Lord Hastings, another Governor General, a typical policy called forward policy was introduced. Once again, to check the growth of princely states. Forward policy. And we have in between Lord Hastings and Wellesley, not Wellesley, Dalhousie. We have another policy of subordination, or it is called as subordination isolation. You know the meaning of the word isolation. To this, another word is prefixed. So we have the prefix subordination, suffix isolation, make the princely states as your subordinate, and in the due process, make it isolate. Isolate from whom? Isolate from other contemporary princely states. You understand? And at last, we have the policy of annexation. This is the gradual growth of annexing princely states to English East India Company through the introduction of several policies as measures. From 1820 to 1857, we come across the introduction of several such peculiar policies, and all these were considered as English policy, or we will put it as policy of the British towards Indian princely states. This is an aspect of indirect colonial situation, where in such circumstances we come across different types of developments which are analyzed, they have been studied. For example, some of these results were phenomenal. The English East India Company, they never expected that such profit would emerge from their policy if they were introduced over princely states. For example, all these policies, they were very much influenced by the army. Army was very much essential then. Stationing of the army, cost of maintaining the army. Say, for example, administrative expenditures to be incurred not by the English company, but by the princely Maharaja or the administrator of princely state. And whoever prince or Maharaja came to the English company in terms of treaties, peace treaties, all these were unequal terms. Unequal terms of peace and agreements. And all these conditions were imposed upon princely states. And the last thing was the imposition of a distinct policy by name doctrine of lapse that was introduced during the time of Lord Dalhousie. Around 1820, according to an estimate, there were more than 560 such princely states in India. And the statistics differ from one historian to another. Around 1947, it was said that there were more than 600 princely states. And almost all the 600 princely states, they merged their geographical territories into Indian Union between 1947 and 1950, soon after India became independent. Prior to India became a republic. All these princes, Maharajas, representatives, they had their own traditional hereditary rights of ruling and administration. And most of the states, majority of them, they had signed treaties and agreements with the English East India Company. And in this context, I would like to tell you about the two important studies that has been done and published. One is Barbara N. Ramusak, B-A-R-B-A-R-A, Barbara N. Ramusak, R-A-M-U-S-A-C-K. She published a book in 2004. It is published in the series New Cambridge History of India, number 3, volume 6, titled The Indian Princes and Their States. This deals with the development of princely states in India during the second half of the 19th and the first half of the 20th century. Second work is written by another prominent historian by name C.A. Bailey, B-A-Y-L-Y. It also belongs to this series, New Cambridge History of India, volume 2, number 1. And the title of this book is Indian Society and the Making of the British Empire. Indian Society and the Making of the British Empire. These two books are wonderful. They are thought-provoking about princely states, or I think if you read these two books, they would certainly change your idea, whatever you have about these Indian princely states. This book was published in 1988. And about the concept of indirect rule. See, I am trying to make you comfortable with the word indirect colonialism, replacing it with the words indirect rule. Direct rule was done by Indian princes and Maharajas. But above him, there was another setup, indirect rule. So, hence, these princes or princely states were called directly ruled and indirectly ruled. In 1984, a historian, anthropologist historian by name Michael H. Fisher, he wrote a wonderful article in a journal, Modern Asian Studies. The title of the article is Indirect Rule in British Empire, the Foundations of the Residency System in India. This is a new word, residency. You know, in Bengaluru, there is a road, a residency road. How many of you are from Bengaluru? Are there anyone? Residency road, Bengaluru.
I know it, sir. Near Brigade Road, sir.
Yes, residency road. That is the road where British resident resided, whose responsibility was to not administer princely state of Mysore, but to oversee the administration. His responsibility was not even to supervise the administration, to oversee. Simply like if you have a function in your home, there will be an elderly person sitting on a chair or sitting on an armchair looking at whatever the things happening. It is neither supervision nor overseeing, but the resident in princely states, he oversees the administration. This residency system, hereditary kingship, all these came under the influence of indirect colonial situation in princely states, and it is applicable to princely state of Mysore also. Many historians have pointed out the subversion and many times the unethical treatment. I have used the words, two words, subversion and unethical treatment of princely states. If you are treating a Maharaja or if you are treating a princely state, there should be some ethics behind it. Then what do you understand by the words unethical treatment? Subversion and treating princely states in an unethical manner, all these were impacts of colonialism. And if you take into consideration the argument put forward by Michael H. Fisher, the office of residency, or in general, residency system, it demanded more from princely states. In fact, resident or the office of residency, it acted as a mediator between princely states and indirect colonial rule. Or it acted as a mediator between Indian India and colonialism. Normally, residents, they resided in royal courts. And it is very interesting. Nothing escaped their attention in the royal court. Nothing escaped from their attention. They used to write reports immediately to their immediate bosses. For example, resident in princely state of Mysore wrote reports, wrote letters. He had correspondence, and hence we have residency records. We have fortnightly reports written once in 15 days. And what is actually, or what happened actually, when princely Mysore was carved out in 1799? As I told you, the carving out of princely Mysore and the basic care was taken that it was surrounded by British and their allies without any contact with coastal region. Princely Mysore was a subsidiary state where every year it paid subsidiary amount without any fail to English East India Company. It was these two mechanisms of indirect colonialism, making it subsidiary and making it subservient. These were the two mechanisms which English East India Company used to convert these princely states to come under their influence of indirect colonialism. Hence, princely Mysore was under indirect political control during the first half of the 19th century.
Excuse me, sir, not audible, sir.
Hello?
Sir, audible, but it is problem for you, Shantaraj, sir. It is audible, sir. You carry on, sir.
Audible. Please continue, sir.
Audible, sir.
Continue.
Continue, sir.
Continue, sir.
Continue.
So 19th century, princely Mysore, from 1799 to 1834, it was ruled by the representative of the Wadayar dynasty, where in 1799, since the representative of the Wadayar dynasty, he was minor, administration was carried in his name by his regent and Diwan Purnaya. And in 1812, when Maharaja attained the majority, he began his direct administration. Though he ruled, administered with the help of the Diwans. I think you know the difference between administration and ruling. Not all rulers are good administrators. Not all administrators are rulers. 1834, the question which was raised by one in the participant, Nagar rebellion. It was both economic consequence as well as the apathy of the administration of Maharaja towards his subjects. From 1831 to 1881, princely state of Mysore was brought under the control of the rule as well as administration under the commissioners. This period is called as the period of the commissioners' rule. For 50 years, for 5 decades, it was also the period of colonial modernization. The administration of princely Mysore during this period was thoroughly modernized. Thoroughly modernized on the principles on the assumptions that it would suit the conditions of the contemporary administrative structure. As that period is called as the period of colonial modernization. We have modern administrative structure slowly evolving in princely state of Mysore. Old regime is replaced by new kind of administrative system. As we have seen in direct colonial situation, new revenue system came to be introduced, which replaced old revenue pattern. New colonial bureaucracy was introduced. And whatever the system of new colonial bureaucratic system that was introduced, it gradually replaced the old administrative structure and the order. Modernity came to be introduced, but many research has been done and many works have been published. Even now also people are interested to study and write on commissioner's role in princely Mysore. There is much scope for our analysis. In spite of all those developments, within inverted comma, modern developments, all these rulers are in one or the other sense, They were more reactionary and regressive. And unfortunately, in an indirect political situation like princely state of Mysore, commissioners becoming more reactionary, more regressive. They wanted to bring under their control the whole political system, administrative structure, destroy it and start reconstructing on new structure. And during this time, we should not fail to mention the contributions or the service rendered by two important commissioners. One is Mark Cubbon. A park and a road is named after him in Bengaluru. And Levin Bentham Bowring, where a hospital is named after him in Bengaluru. Cubbon and Bowring, it was during this or the administration of these commissioners, there was gradual percolation of indirect colonial rule on princely state of Mysore. Many writers have done serious research about that. Long back in 1931, before independence, a professor from Maharaja's College, he had done wonderful research, spending valuable time in British Museum collecting materials on the administration of Mark Cubbon. That was published in 1931, long back. Similarly, many scholars have done their work. And on the basis of these works, I would like to bring to your kind notice 4 important developments which princely state of Mysore underwent during this period. One is the field of education. I will not explain or I will not spell out all the 4 features. I will spell out one feature and explain, then go to the second one, explain. The first one is colonial education. That was systematically introduced. One of the greatest contributors of indirect colonial situation to princely state of Mysore is its contribution in the development and growth of modern system of education. In 1854, I think most of you know that there was a dispatch by name Halifax Dispatch, which dealt with the introduction of Western education. After the introduction of Western education in 1835, Halifax Dispatch in 1854. Same year, in princely Mysore, a scheme was implemented and later introduced by name Devereux system, Devereaux, Devereux system. Mr. J. Devereux, he was the judicial commissioner, and a judicial commissioner was entrusted the responsibility of formulating the education policy to be implemented in princely Mysore. Hence, he was assigned that work. He prepared that report, submitted it to the government of princely Mysore. That was sent to British government, Kolkata. After their consent, it was implemented. The same time, we have Christian missionaries becoming active in princely Mysore. Some of them, they had established their educational institutions in Bengaluru, in Mysuru, and in one of the remote corners, not corner actually, it's a small village by name Gubbi near Tumkuru. They had established. a missionary school. In Mysore town, we had a London Missionary Society school. In Bengaluru, we had several missionaries establishing their own educational institutions. And I think along with the spread of education, some of the Christian missionaries, they also started the faith, Christian faith. And some of these missionary schools, they had their own textbooks. And some missionary schools run in princely Mysore, they were getting a grant in aid. Now we are under the impression that this grant in aid code is very recent in Karnataka. The system was prevalent more than 150 years ago in princely Mysore. Government of the Commissioner of Mysore gave grant in aid to certain schools. And second area is the problem dealing with the famine and drought conditions. Princely Mysore, occasionally, many times, let us not use the word occasion, many times, it underwent severe drought and famine conditions. It was due to fall in the rainfall, declining in rainfall. And princely state of Mysore was basically an agrarian state where 90% of the people depended on agriculture. It had few districts and 3 districts on the western side, they were called Malenadu district. And the rest of the districts were identified with the Maidan region. In Maidan region, where drought occurred occasionally, there were frequent famine and drought conditions. And such drought and famine conditions were not tackled properly by the administration in princely state of Mysore. That was a contribution of indirect colonialism. To tackle famine and drought condition, after 1850, the government in princely state of Mysore, it started giving much scope for the expansion and renovation of existing irrigational canals and systems. It considered that if water is made to flow, it would certainly help agriculture. Storing of water. Number 3 is that a large number of people living then in princely state of Mysore, they had given a representation to tackle such severe famine and drought conditions. Particularly in 1876, between 1876 and 1878, major parts of India were severely affected by severe famine, not drought. Drought is different from famine. Severe famine, where a large number of people died. Livestock perished, agriculture declined, scarcity of rainfall, no rain for nearly 3 monsoons had fled. 3 retreating monsoons had fled. Drop in agricultural production. All these conditions were prevailing, and during this period, very rarely we come across people seeking a solace. That means I was talking about people giving a representation for the government to tackle water problem, agricultural problem, and all these are narrated in different works. For example, there are two books on famine in India. One is by B.M. Bhatia, Famines in India. It's a wonderful book. And there is one more report on famine in India, published after 1880 by William Digby, Digby. This is something like on-hand account of famine conditions. Number three, the policy of deindustrialization. That was I was referring to in the earlier session. I mean to say that the government of the commissioner in princely Mysore, they did not support the development of indigenous industries in princely state of Mysore. Many scholars have written about this. For example, why industries did not emerge in princely Mysore? One thing which influenced in the emergence of industries was the proper transportation means and communication. Industries, they needed huge area where raw materials are procured or produced. To support industries, for example, princely state of Mysore, it made allocations for the development of railway transport communication system. You know, that train connecting Bengaluru and Mysore was taken up as a famine relief work. It was taken up as a famine relief work. Laborers, they were not paid in terms of cash. They were paid in terms of kind. Hence, the railway transportation system, which began to grow after 1870, it is also considered or analyzed as the introduction of indirect colonial setup on princely state of Mysore. Number four is in princely Mysore, the Malnad region. You know, Malnad region, it consisted of 3 districts, especially 2 districts. One is Kadur. It was called Kadur district because Chikmagalur was not the district headquarters then. Secondly, Hassan, particularly a region known as Manjrabad, now Sakleshpur. Huge tract of forest land was leased to European planters to cultivate coffee. So coffee cultivation was under the control of Europeans. There were also many coffee cultivators in these 2 regions, but they had small land holdings. But huge land holdings were under the control of European planters. And European capital was invested in the expansion and growth of coffee cultivation in Malnad region then. And naturally, coffee as a prime product of export, it grew or its demand increased. Hence, these were the 4 areas where indirect colonial situation, it prevailed in princely state of Mysore. And the last and the most important thing is that almost all the princely states in India, in colonial India, as I told you that there were more than 560 such states. Majority of the states, they had accepted the agreements, treaties forwarded, made, scrutinized by English East India Company. There were no states in India which had escaped these treaties and agreements. And agreements and treaties were made as a way, WAY, to acquire money, because English East India Company, it needed money badly in India to expand colonialism in India. They needed money. Because after 1813 and 1820, colonialism in India and the money which traders of English East India Company had acquired earlier began to decline after 1820 because of one thing. Because English East India Company, they had expanded their trade in United States. Cotton trade. They had started acquiring more wealth from their trade relations in United States of America. 1813, we have the Charter Act. And after 1813, after 20 years, we have another set of Charter Acts in 1833. And 1833 onwards, we have declining trend in trade which the English East India Company had in India. This is the period of consolidation of political supremacy in India, and to expand their political supremacy, the English East India Company wanted to have their control extended over vast geographical territory in India. Hence, they decided that they should hereafterwards look forward towards princely states in India, to have or bring under their control. They used several mechanisms. On the one side, they have several mechanisms. On the one side, they have several policies. On the other side, they have certain mechanisms. And policies and the mechanisms, they have to be understood parallelly. And all these things, whether direct colonial or indirect colonial, it is the situation which existed in princely state of Mysore. And most importantly, that the traditional or hereditary political rights of the Maharajas and the princes, they were gradually to be suppressed. For example, in 1840, from 1840 onwards, I think you know, there were many states in Rajasthan, they were called as Rajput states. There were big and small Rajput states. There were many such small states in the heart of India. And there was also a big state by name Hyderabad, which was considered geographically the bigger among the princely states in India then. Princely Mysore was number 6 in terms of geographical location, in terms of geographical boundary. There were also small states in Rajasthan where it had its geographical limitation was something limited to certain square meters. So small, minute, small, medium, big, large, all these states put together, there were more than 560. And in many Rajput states, and in many such states in central part of India, their English East India Company had imposed not indirect colonial situation, it had directly imposed colonialism. There were states coming under direct colonial control. There were also many states coming under indirect political control, colonial control, like princely state of Mysore. What were the advantages of indirect colonial situation in princely Mysore? More than the disadvantages, more than negative impacts, according to studies that have been published, researched, written, circulated, and read, more positive effects have been identified in princely state of Mysore. And most of the historians, they are under the impression that indirect colonial political control has done or did marvelous things in princely Mysore. And they have identified 3 areas where modernity, concept of modernization mixed with the traditionality, or modernity and traditionality, a synthesis was worked out in princely state of Mysore, particularly during the time of indirect political control. We are informed that, and I have told you earlier also, that commissioners were regressive, they were reactionary, they were not popular among the people. People had a fear about commissioners because he had under their control vast bureaucracy, and bureaucracy was standing between the commissioners' administration and the people. It acted as a media. In spite of all these things, the contributions of our commissioners. And again, historians have identified 3 important areas where princely Mysore developed. One is education. I think many of you certainly agree with me if I say that in 19th century India, compared with all the princely states, princely state of Mysore Whether it was indirect or colonial control, it was much ahead of many several hundreds of such states in the field of education. It had been achieving or making much progress in the field of education. I am talking about the situations which prevailed in 1850 onwards, when commissioners were ruling, when colonialism has replaced imperialism, or imperialism had replaced colonialism in major parts of India after 1857. So the education, field of education. Secondly, society or social conditions. Some of these things which societal development took place in princely Mysore, they can be compared with the certain traditional societies that underwent same kind of process during the same period in certain Southeast Asian islands where the Dutch had their control in the same period. One is education, number two is society or societal conditions, number three is gradually princely state of Mysore acquired the importance of being or becoming a model within inverted comma, model state to many such contemporary princely states because of its administration. Because of its administration, we have to identify that there were many positive elements in the field of administration. I told you it was a colonized or colonial modern bureaucracy. Colonial modern bureaucracy. Colonial modern bureaucracy, it had attracted the attention of many people who had been benefited by the educational policy implemented in Mysore state during this time. Those persons who had studied there, they joined here, and hence Mysore became a model state. And the state of princely state of Mysore becoming a model state, it was, according to many historians, it was not for the namesake. It was really a model state. Taking into consideration the statistics available during this period, you know, in the first session, I was talking about the colonial knowledge as referred to by Bernard Escott. You know, in princely Mysore, when princely Mysore was under the direct political control in the early part of the 19th century, a system emerged in Mysore state. Recently, they had acquired the geographical possessions held by Tipu Sultan and that had been brought under their control. They commissioned a work to know more about or more details about those geographical possessions. So they commissioned a work. And Dr. Buchanan, you have heard his name, I think. Buchanan was assigned this task, he was commissioned to provide or to submit a report about such geographical regions which they have acquired recently. And that fellow, he travels in princely state of Mysore for nearly 2.5 years. He travels, he goes to neighboring Malabar, he travels in Madras Presidency. In 1807, he submits his report in the form of 3 bulky volumes that is called Journey through the provinces of Mysore, Malabar and Madras in huge 3 volumes. This is one thing. Secondly, during the time of commissioner's rule, there was a person by name Benjamin Hayne. It was he who published the first statistical data about princely state of Mysore. That was in 1854. Benjamin Hayne. The data statistics in that report is quite interesting. You know, it contains details about the population. It is nothing but empirical data about many things contemporary. And you know, the first census report was undertaken in 1871. Princely Mysore. And from 1881 onwards, we have census, that is decadal census, once in 10 years. 1871. Between 1831 and 1881, there are number of reports appearing. Like Benjamin Hayne's statistical abstract, we have another person who was in the Mysore Commission by name R.S. Dobbs, Dobbs. He was stationed at Chitradurga. You know, he wrote his experiences. That book was published in, I think, in 1881. Title of the book, Mysore, Burma and South Africa. He served here. He gives us information about many things in and around Chitradurga. And interestingly, his name is, or a town near Tumkur is named after him, Dobbspet. And it was he who built the famous cottage at Devarayandurga near Tumkur, where there is a reserve forest, Devarayandurga. So we have Buchanan, Benjamin Hayne we have, R.S. Dobbs we have. This is the knowledge. Somebody was asking about Bernard Escon's knowledge. This is colonial knowledge. They used these statistics and gradually they tried to implement all these knowledges as part and parcel of their administrative mechanisms. Okay, I will finish this. If you have any questions, you can talk to me. You can tell me. Now it is 12:54, right? Is it 12:55?
Yes, sir.
Sir, yes, sir.